Thanks very much, everyone. I was interested that John was talking before about doing it better, and I guess that's a little bit about what we're on about here. The Productivity Commission was asked to look at local government regulation and to see whether, in fact, performance in that area could be improved. So I'm not here to talk to you today about infrastructure or about rates. This is about regulation. Yes. This is our understanding about what local government is. You have your own revenue collection, you have your own constituents, you're responsible for your own communities, and central government similarly collects taxes and is responsible to their own constituents. We would describe you as spheres of government, but you also are highly connected and interconnected, and in the regulation space that becomes very obvious. Let's have a look at what you do in the regulation space. It's a heap of stuff. It covers, health and safety regulations. It covers resource consenting. It covers building consents. It covers dogs. It's a huge area of responsibility. But what we discovered in the inquiry is that workload is almost entirely driven by central government through pieces of legislation, over 30 of them, relating to responsibilities that are conferred upon local government. And what we also found was that you're not using your general bylaw making powers to make stuff up, to regulate in areas that you're not supposed to be regulating, or you're not getting into new areas. What you're doing, if you're making bylaws, is often in reference to making effective or implementing pieces of legislation. A good example of that we've come across in our talking around the country is bylaws around stock movements. On roads going from farm to farm, or from part of a farm to part of a farm across a major road. These all relate to the Land Transport Act. Right, so they're being conferred, really those powers have been conferred from above. Well, in the regulation space, it's about 6% of what you do. That covers about the top 4 areas: buildings, resource consents, environmental health and animal control. So it is a small part. We recognise that it's a small part of your wider role in the community. But in saying that, also, you are part of a big regulatory system. And that involves the whole process of making regulatory policy and conferring that down to, you're an actor and part of a big regulatory machine, if you like, and mostly in the administration and implementation and monitoring sphere. So that's quite a sort of hard place for you to be, really, in a way. It's a small part of what you do as part of your business, but you're also a part of the bigger business of a big regulatory machine. Well, let's have a look at that machine. For us, and this was very well brought home to us in the submission that we received in the inquiry from Local Government New Zealand and from Solgum, was that actually the whole system has to be looked at, not just what happens with what you're doing on the ground. And the performance of the entire system will determine how well regulations meet their objectives, because that's what regulations are for. They're to achieve some kind of outcome, some kind of beneficial outcome that we're seeking. And of course, those outcomes are very difficult to measure. How can you know, really, how well regulations are fulfilling their particular function? One of the things that you can do, though, is to rely on good process. If you are doing the right things, you are more likely to end up with the right kind of outcome. That's what we believe. And so what are those right things? Well, they've got to be designed well in the first place. And then councils have got to have process that is going to allow them to allocate the resources that they've got where they are expected to generate the most benefit, where you expect those outcomes to happen. And there has to be the right capability as well. If we can get those things right, it's more likely that we're going to get a good regulatory outcome. And so quite a lot of the Commission's inquiry is into, are those things right? You've got a new purpose statement. Oops, that didn't quite click over. Yep, there we go. And you all know what it is. This is a big focus, I suppose, of today. But one of the interesting things is this, for us, is the bit in bold. It's about the performance of regulatory functions in a way that is most cost effective for households and businesses. And today I want to focus on the effective bit. How can you be more effective in what you do? Well, one of the things that we did in our inquiry was that we surveyed business. In fact, we surveyed 1,500 businesses across the whole country, and we aggregated those up. So the responses are the New Zealand-wide responses, and it's about their interaction with local government over regulatory matters. So what we've done for today is we extracted the information that was told to us from businesses for those that dealt with Bay of Plenty area. And in that we included Thames Coromandel, because I gather that there are people from Thames Coromandel here today. And so we took those, and so basically if the business was located here or dealt with you, so they might have been a bigger business somewhere else, but they worked in the Bay of Plenty, wider Bay of Plenty region, then we included them in. And so that was about 150, so about 10% of the sample, which seems about right for the size of the area. And so we had a range of questions that we asked business, and so what you can see there is the results for, on a number of things I'll show you, between the wider New Zealand picture, so this is a perception from business of local government and Bay of Plenty. So you might be interested to see how well you do compared to the average kind of picture. But let's start to have a look at some of those. The council provided reliable and consistent advice. There you go. Nearly 37% said yes, nearly 40% in the Bay of Plenty, but 30% said no. What's that about? You're not providing, 30% of businesses are saying you're not providing reliable and consistent advice. This is core business for councils. Time taken to process consent. Applications, 37% said yes, nearly 30% said no. Is 37% enough? I found the regulations inconsistent between councils. 40% said that they found that they were inconsistent. Now the interesting thing is that sometimes it was about between councils, but most of the time it was actually within the council. So dealing with different regulatory officers over the same matter. Now for business, that's costly and it's time-consuming and it's confusing. Okay, and overall satisfaction. Nearly 30% were dissatisfied with their interactions with the local council, but less so in the Bay of Plenty. Well, what about the potential for cooperation? Cooperation across multiple local authorities can improve effectiveness. And what we found, quite surprising for us, and certainly I think for central government, was 89% of councils coordinate or collaborate with other councils in their regulatory functions. That was quite a stunning result. And this is the ways in which you do it. So you've got shared or rotated staff, contract of regulatory services. So around capability, we thought, right, is why it is that you're cooperating and you're collaborating. But one of the things that we thought was really, whilst, common regulatory standards was a goal or a reason to collaborate, or that's what you were collaborating over, and mutual recognition, that was less so. And deciding whether or not to cooperate. Look at these things here, about whether you can let go of control, whether you can get buy-in from your councillors. It just seemed to us that these are the things, if these are the decision whether or not to cooperate, are they barriers to cooperation? But actually the thing is, they're within your power. These are all the things that are within your control. So, early conclusions, because we're only at the draft report stage, we did find that there were huge gaps in the way that regulations are made at central government level, and particularly in the implementation analysis. That is, how did it affect you? How was it going to work on the ground? But that we also suspect that there are issues out there with the monitoring and enforcement of regulations. And we'd like to know a little bit more about that, and we hope that you will take the opportunity in the submissions process before the final report to tell us more about the way in which regulations are actually working on the ground. And are they actually undermining the objective for which they were set? So we have some further lines of inquiry. We're interested in whether variation in regulatory practice across different local councils is actually due to local circumstances, and we believe that there is a lot of that. But when is it just ad hoc? When is it just the way you've always kind of done it? Is it just because you didn't actually have the time, because maybe regulation was rushed through and you got something new to do, that you couldn't work with your neighbouring councils over a common approach? Tell us what's going on out there. And what are the outcomes of regulation? Do you know? How can you measure them? Are you thinking about that when you're regulating? And how are they being implemented on the ground? And I would just like to kind of conclude with actually a little bit more about this. We're interested in what the drivers are of where you put your resources in regulation. And so there's an awful lot in there about meeting statutory timeframes and impact on the compliance of residents. What's that about? Is it because you're told to have there are timeframes you have to meet? Is that a compliance kind of thing for you? A performance measure? Or is it that you really are concerned about customer service? You talk about the impact of compliance. Is that a public service ethic thing that's going on for you? And about public perceptions on regulatory efficiency, which is driving your recent experiences of non-compliance that you're being told about. This is part of your formal accountability, back to your people, back to your residents. What is actually going on here? But one of the things that we are really interested in is, what about the cost-benefit analysis? What about the looking at the outcomes and the amount of resources that you're putting in to get those outcomes? What's going on in that space? Because we believe that that's really important. Okay, so to wrap up, we're talking more. We want to have further engagement with business and with local residents, and we want to have further engagement with local government. You can put in submissions onto the draft report, and they close on the 6th of March, and then we will write the final report, and it gets tabled with government on the 1st of May. So our website is there, copies of the draft report are available online. I also have copies. Talk to us. Thank you.